the day my son-in-law grabbed the title to my house off the kitchen counter and said, "We'll hold on to this for safekeeping." I laughed. I actually laughed. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. I'm 68 years old. I taught third grade for 31 years at Millbrook Elementary in Columbus, Ohio. I raised my daughter Audrey mostly on my own after her father walked out when she was 9. I worked double shifts in summers, drove a car with a busted heater for 6 years because I couldn't afford to fix it, and I saved every spare dollar I had. When I retired, I owned my home outright, a 3-bedroom house on Clover Hill Drive that I'd paid off 2 years before my last day of work. No mortgage, no debt. Just me, my garden, my cat Chester, and 31 years of report cards I couldn't bring myself to throw away. That was the life I had built. That was mine. Audrey called me on a Tuesday in late February. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said her husband, I'll call him Derek, because even now I struggle to say his name without my jaw tightening, had lost his job. They were 3 months behind on their apartment rent in Cincinnati. The landlord had given them 30 days. "Mom," she said, "I don't know what to do. I told her to come home." "Of course I did. She was my daughter." "You don't let your child sleep in a car." What I said was, "You can stay in the guest room while you two get back on your feet. 3 months, maybe 4. We'll figure it out together." What I did not say, and what I should have said, I know that now, was, "And here are the rules." I didn't set a single boundary. I didn't write anything down. I just opened the door because she was crying and she was mine, and I thought love was enough. They arrived on a Saturday with a moving truck. A moving truck, not 2 suitcases and a garbage bag of clothes. A 16-foot budget truck packed with their sectional sofa, their 75-inch television, Derek's workout equipment, 3 bedroom sets, and approximately 40 boxes labeled in Audrey's handwriting. Kitchen, living room, master BR, master bedroom. I stood on the front porch watching Derek back that truck into my driveway, and I felt something cold move through my chest. But Audrey came running up the steps and hugged me, and she smelled like the lavender shampoo she'd used since she was 15. And I told myself I was being silly. The first week wasn't bad. Audrey cooked dinner twice. Derek mowed the lawn without being asked. They were grateful. Or they seemed grateful. I see now that the first week was a performance, and I was the only one in the audience who didn't know it was a show. By the 3rd week, Derek had rearranged my living room furniture to make better use of the space. My reading chair, the wingback I'd had for 20 years, the one with the worn armrest where Chester liked to sleep, was moved to the corner by the water heater where there was no light. His sectional now took up 3/4 of the room. The 75-inch television was mounted on my wall. There were holes in my drywall that he'd made without asking. When I said something, he looked at me with this expression I came to know very well over the following months. Patient, slightly tired. The look you give a child who keeps asking the same question. "Shirley," he said. He always called me Shirley. Never Mom, never Mrs. Hendricks. "We're trying to make this work for everyone. Don't you want it to be comfortable?" I went to bed that night and stared at the ceiling and told Chester that I was overreacting. Chester didn't agree or disagree. He just kneaded my stomach and purred, which I appreciated. By the 6th week, Audrey came to me and said they needed the guest room. For context, I was sleeping in the guest room. I had given them my master bedroom because it was larger and had the ensuite bathroom, and I told myself it was temporary, a kind gesture, the sort of thing a good mother does. I had moved my clothes into the guest room closet. I had moved my toiletries into the hallway bathroom. I had made myself smaller so they could fit. And now Audrey was standing in the doorway of the guest room, my temporary room, the room I had already shrunk myself into, and she was saying they needed it for a home office. Derek was doing freelance work, she said. He needed a dedicated space. "Where would I sleep?" I asked. She looked at the floor. "We thought maybe you could use the sunroom? We could put a pull-out couch in there. It would be cozy." The sunroom. The room with the jalousie windows that let in every draft from October to April. The room I used for seedlings and Christmas decorations. I said no. That was the first time I said no clearly, directly, without softening it or apologizing for it. I said, "Audrey, this is my house. I am not sleeping in the sunroom," she cried. Not sad crying. The kind of crying that is meant to make you feel like the villain. Derek appeared in the hallway. He had a way of materializing whenever Audrey started crying, and he put his arm around her and looked at me with that patient, tired expression and said, "Shirley, we're all under a lot of stress. Let's try to be a team here." I stayed in the guest room. But something had shifted. I could feel it the way you feel a change in weather before the clouds come. My neighbor Wanda, she's 72, sharp as a tack, retired paralegal, came over for coffee in March and sat at my kitchen table looking around at what had become of my house. Derek's protein powder on the counter. Audrey's skincare products lined up along the windowsill, a chore chart on my refrigerator that neither of them had made with me or asked my permission to put up. "How long has this been going on?" Wanda said. 8 weeks, I said. She set down her mug and looked at me over her reading glasses. "Shirley, where's your stuff?" I looked around my own kitchen and realized I couldn't immediately answer that question. Wanda didn't tell me what to do. She just listened, and as I talked I could hear how bad it sounded, laid out in order. The furniture, the bedroom, the chore chart, the way Derek would answer questions that people asked me in my own house as though I were a guest and he were the host. "Talk to a lawyer," Wanda said when I was done. "Before anything else happens. Just know where you stand." I called an attorney that week. Her name was Ms. Aldridge. No, wait, I've already used that name. Her name was Ms. Okafor, and she had an office downtown off Broad Street, and she sat across from me and listened carefully while I described the situation, and then she told me several things I did not know. She told me that because Derek and Audrey had been living in my home for more than 30 days, they had established tenancy under Ohio law, that even though their names were on nothing, no lease, no deed, no mortgage, I could not simply ask them to leave and expect them to go. I would need to give written notice, possibly go through a formal eviction process. "Even in your own home," I said. "Even in your own home," she said. She also told me to check on my financial documents, my deed, my bank accounts, my insurance policies. She said it in a careful, gentle way that made me understand she was not being paranoid on my behalf. She was being experienced. I went home that afternoon and went to the fireproof box I kept in the back of my closet. The one with my will, my deed, my late mother's jewelry, and about $8,000 in savings bonds that had matured over the years. The deed was there. The savings bonds were there, but when I checked my online banking that evening, I found something that made me sit down on the edge of the guest bed and grip my phone with both hands. 3 weeks earlier, someone had added Derek as an authorized user on my checking account. I had not done this. I called the bank the next morning. They walked me through the records. Someone had come into a branch location with my ID, or a copy of it, and processed the change in person. The branch manager was apologetic and horrified, and immediately began the process of removing Derek's access and flagging the account. She also told me to file a police report. I called Ms. Okafor. Then I called Wanda. Wanda came over within 20 minutes. She sat with me at the kitchen table while I shook, and she said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. I want to tell you something about having a friend like Wanda. When you are 68 years old and something terrible is happening inside your own home, and you feel ashamed and confused, and like somehow this is your fault for being too trusting, too loving, too soft, having one person who sits across from you and says, 'Here's what we're going to do,' instead of 'How did you let this happen?' is everything." She is everything. We made a plan. I would not confront Derek and Audrey yet. I would document everything first. Wanda had a small digital camera she'd used for a case years ago, and she helped me photograph every change that had been made to my home. The holes in the walls, the furniture, the chore chart, the way my belongings had been gradually relocated to corners and closets, as though I were being slowly erased from my own house. I contacted my bank about the fraudulent account change and completed the police report. Ms. Okafor sent me home with a formal notice of termination of tenancy, 30 days written notice, which Ohio law requires, and I served it to Audrey and Derek on a Thursday evening in April. Derek laughed. He actually laughed. He took the papers from my hand, looked at them, and laughed like I had handed him a joke instead of a legal document. "You can't evict us, Shirley," he said. "We're family." Audrey said nothing. She stood behind him and looked at the papers, and then looked at me, and I searched her face for the 9-year-old who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, and I couldn't find her. I don't know when she disappeared. I don't know if Derek replaced her gradually or if she was complicit all along and I simply loved her too much to see it. "The papers are legal," I said. 30 days. That's the law." Derek dropped them on my kitchen counter and walked away. Over the next 2 weeks, things deteriorated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Small things first. My potted plants on the back porch were moved to the side of the house out of the way. My cat Chester was relegated to my bedroom because Derek claimed he was allergic, a claim that had never come up in the previous 4 months. The thermostat was changed so that the house ran at 78 degrees during the day, and when I turned it down, it was turned back up. One morning I came downstairs and found that the lock on my front door had been changed. My key no longer worked. I stood on my own front porch at 7 in the morning, locked out of my house in my bathrobe, and I felt something clarify inside me. Not anger, exactly. More like the specific calm that comes when you are done being afraid. I knocked. Derek opened the door, coffee in hand, and said the old lock had been sticking, so he'd replaced it. He hadn't gotten around to making me a key yet, I said. "I will be calling a locksmith and my attorney today. If this lock is not changed back by 5 o'clock, I will have both of them here with a police officer at 5:01. He gave me the key by noon, but I called Ms. Okafor anyway, because the lock was documented now, and because I had started to understand that every incident mattered. Everything went into the file. The 30 days passed and they did not leave. We went to court. Ms. Okafor had prepared carefully. She presented the documentation of the unauthorized bank account change, the police report, the bank's own records, a statement from the branch manager. She presented photographs of the property damage. She presented the pattern of conduct that Ms. Okafor described to the magistrate as systematic displacement. The bedroom, the guest room, the sunroom request, the changed lock, the gradual removal of my possessions to less and less inhabitable spaces. Derek had a lawyer too, a younger man who kept using the word family like it was a legal defense. He said my daughter and son-in-law had made improvements to the property. He said the situation had been mutually agreed upon. He said I was a difficult woman who had changed her mind. The magistrate, a woman in her 60s herself, looked at Derek's lawyer for a long moment after he finished speaking. Then she looked at the bank documents. Then she looked at me. We won. Not just the eviction. The fraud charge against Derek moved forward separately. The DA's office picked it up because the bank's records were clean and the evidence was straightforward. He and Audrey had 30 days to vacate under court supervision. A bailiff would be present for their removal if necessary. I drove home from that courthouse feeling something I couldn't immediately name. Not happiness, exactly. Relief, maybe, but heavier than relief. The particular exhaustion of a battle you never wanted to fight. The day they were supposed to leave, Wanda offered to come over and stay with me. I said no. I needed to do this part alone, or as alone as I could manage. What I didn't tell Wanda was that I planned to be parked a few houses down, watching, because Ms. Okafor had advised me to let the process happen without me present to keep things calm. I sat in my car on Clover Hill Drive with a thermos of coffee and watched the court-supervised moving process from a distance. It took about 3 hours. Derek carried boxes with the efficient, furious energy of a man who knows he has lost. Audrey carried almost nothing. She stood in the driveway a lot, looking at her phone. When the last box was loaded and the bailiff's car pulled away, I gave it another 15 minutes. Then I drove back to my own house and parked in my own driveway and sat there for a moment. I could hear something from the backyard. Music. Not loud exactly, but distinct. A Bluetooth speaker, the kind that carries. I walked around the side of the house quietly. Audrey and Derek were in my backyard. They had not left yet. They were standing by my garden fence with the Bluetooth speaker on the patio table, and Derek had a beer in his hand, and Audrey was laughing at something on her phone. And as I stood at the corner of my house where they couldn't see me yet, I heard Derek say, loud enough to be confident no one was listening, "She's finally out of her own house. How pathetic is that? 68 years old and couldn't even hold on to what she had." Audrey laughed. Not the complicated laugh of someone who feels bad about what she's doing. Just a laugh. "She'll be fine," Audrey said. "She has Wanda." "We should have pushed harder on the sunroom," Derek said. "She would have caved eventually. They always do. They always do." I stepped around the corner of the house so they could see me. Derek saw me first. The beer lowered. The expression on his face moved through several emotions quickly. Surprise, then something that might have been guilt, then a reassembling of the usual confidence. "We were just leaving," he said. "I know," I said. "I've been here for a few minutes." The silence that followed was very satisfying. I didn't say anything dramatic. I didn't need to. I stood in my backyard on my property and waited. And they gathered the Bluetooth speaker and their remaining items, and they left through the side gate without looking at me again. I stood in my backyard for a while after that. The garden needed work. They hadn't touched it, which was the only kindness they'd done my plants. Chester came out through the cat door and wove between my ankles, deeply unbothered by everything that had happened, the way cats are. I called Wanda. "They're gone," I said. "Are you okay?" she said. I thought about it honestly, the way you can only do with someone who already knows the real answer anyway. "I will be," I said. "Come over. I have leftover lasagna." She came over. We sat at my kitchen table, in my kitchen, in my house, and we ate lasagna, and Wanda told me about a case she'd once worked on that was somehow worse than mine, which I didn't entirely believe but appreciated. Chester sat on the chair between us and accepted pieces of garlic bread like it was his due. The fraud charges against Derek resulted in a plea agreement 4 months later. Restitution for the unauthorized account access, probation, a permanent mark on his record. I wasn't present for the proceedings. Ms. Okafor kept me informed. Audrey and I have not spoken since the day they left. I have thought about what I might say to her if she called, and I have come to understand that I don't know the answer yet. Maybe I will someday. Maybe I won't. There is a grief in that which I didn't expect. Not grief for Derek, but grief for the child I raised, or for the idea of her, for the lavender shampoo and the thunderstorm mornings, and the person I thought she was becoming. But grief isn't the same as weakness. I know that now. What I want to say to anyone listening who recognizes something in this story, whether it's your son, your daughter, your son-in-law, your daughter-in-law, whoever it is standing in your house, rearranging your furniture, and moving your chair to the dark corner, and looking at you with patient, tired eyes like you are the problem, what I want to say is this. The house has your name on it. The door has your lock. The table is yours. You don't leave. They leave. Don't wait as long as I did to remember that.